Some of you have occasionally asked about the wildfires in Washington State this summer. None of the fires were in areas where I have lived, and none have been where my family currently lives. But one fire in particular was of concern to me. This is a picture of the fire from a distance. Nestled between those valleys is a former mining camp that's been turned into a retreat center called Holden Village. It's accessible only by boat, and then a bus ride in the summer and a snowcat in the winter, up 14 miles of a canyon trail from Lake Chelan. I've had the privilege of being in that place several different times, including a mini sabbatical I took in 1997. Here's a picture of the fire, August 1st, just over the hill coming towards Holden Village. I was glad to hear reports from the year-round staff that lives there. They've returned to the site and are now preparing for winter. It's a sign and a reminder that life goes on. As their website said when they returned, know that this place, miraculously intact, awaits your return. Do not lose hope now. Know that we carry a deep love for you. And most importantly, know that the Holy One is present and travels this space with you. One of the most remarkable things about this place, a place that is sacred to many, is the radical sense of hospitality that everyone always experiences there. Even in the busiest times of the year, when you arrive, you know they have been expecting you. That there is a deep love for the guest, a love rooted in the idea that welcoming the stranger is welcoming Christ. And because the staff believes that in their core, they do whatever it takes to make the guest feel at home. From setting tables to cleaning rooms to inviting casual conversation over coffee, you always sense that what matters to you is driving their behavior. In our gospel lesson today, Jesus begins by telling his disciples for the second time that he will die and rise again. They don't understand or don't want to understand. Instead, they begin to decide who will be the next in line. So Jesus reminds them and us that the primary task is to become a host, to welcome the stranger, to make room for the other. Our gospel lesson comes from the 9th chapter of Mark. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bibles, you can find it on page 55 of the New Testament. From there, Jesus and his followers went through Galilee, but he didn't want anyone to know it. This was because he was teaching his disciples, the human one will be delivered into human hands. They will kill him. 3 days after he's killed, he will rise up. But they didn't understand this kind of talk, and they were afraid to ask him. They entered Capernaum, and when they had entered into a house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about during the journey?" Today we often use object lessons to help children understand, but here Jesus is using a child to help adults understand. These familiar words about welcoming children, often quoted out of context, are about what the disciples need to do to stop their fighting over who's first. Rather, they need to focus on making the least in the world feel welcome. Sometimes that means giving up a position of power. Sometimes that means giving up our comfortable seat. Sometimes that means listening with our heart as well as with our ears. Always it means putting the focus on the other in our midst, whether that be the first-time visitor at church, or the child with the dirty hair at school, or the woman we meet on the street who seems to stare blankly into space. A couple of weeks ago, I heard a radio interview with Pierre Thiam, a world-renowned chef who's also the author of several cooking books. What I was most fascinated by, however, was not the meals and the food he was talking about. It was when he described the sense of hospitality in his culture. To describe it, he used the word taranga. Listen to what he said. Taranga is a Wolof word that would translate to hospitality, but it's not the right way to translate taranga. Taranga is more than just hospitality. It's a value. It's the way you treat the guest. It's the way you treat the other, the one who is not you. That person becomes the one to whom you have to offer taranga. You have to treat him with so much respect. You have to offer him what you have. You have to invite him to sit around your bowl. Why? Because we believe that the other is bringing blessings. When you share your bowl will always be plentiful. This is the deep-seated Senegalese belief. We believe that there's always more. You will never lack by sharing. Actually, when you share, you guarantee yourself that tomorrow, if there's more, there's going to be more food in your bowl. He went on to say, my culture values the wealth of a person not by how much he has, but by how much he shares, by how much he gives. He reminds me that hospitality isn't just about having greeters at the door. It's not just about entertaining guests at a meal. Hospitality is also about the way we make someone else feel. On Thursday, Rhonda and I went to Parsons to watch Jesse run in a cross-country meet. It was hot, so I found a good spot on the course where I was able to hand the runners some water as they went by. Now, most of the runners took the bottle, took a couple swallows, and threw the bottle down. When Jesse came by, he took the water, took a swig, and handed it to another runner who was from another team, and let them take a swig, and then they threw it down. Pretty proud of his sportsmanship at that point. But it was such stark contrast with the story he reminded me of earlier in the week. We'd asked for water at a restaurant while we were on vacation. Jesse had just bought one of those backpack canteens. They have a bladder in them and a straw that goes over the shoulder so you can drink them while you're running or walking or biking or hiking or wherever you want. It was brand new, and all Jesse wanted to do was fill that thing up so he could try it out. So we asked the waitress for a pitcher of water, and then when she saw him pouring the water into this bladder, she almost kicked us out of the restaurant. Now, in fairness to her, it was an arid climate, and water is precious in places like that. But even I thought she overreacted a little bit. We definitely didn't feel welcome in that place. But that happens in all kinds of places and settings. I know many of you know that I retired from the Navy Reserves 5 years ago, and while I'm still looking forward to the day when I can start receiving benefits from my retirement, it was about 2 years ago that I began to miss my interactions with my shipmates. So I began looking, and I found a submarine veterans organization and decided to join it. The dues are not that expensive. They only meet once a month. And for almost 2 years, I was a member and never showed up. This summer, I had a chance to go visit. So I go to their meeting, and when I get to the room, I walk in the door, and there's a crowd of people just standing around talking, and I work my way through the crowd, and I find my place in a seat about the center of the room. It's a lunch meeting, long rows, all facing the front. And pretty soon everybody sits down, and the president at the front says, "Did everybody pay for their meal?" And I said, "I haven't yet." He said, "Okay, well, you have to pay the guy at the back," and that's where all the other people gathered. So I go back there, and he says, "And what's your name?" I mean, we have to do this by reservation. And I tell him I'm Randy Quinn. He says, "Oh, you're Randy Quinn." And then he hollers at the president, who's in the front of the room, Does it have to pay the first time they're here? And it turns out I didn't have to pay because it was my first time there. So I find my way back to the seat. Now, and I talk about crowd. It was probably 30 people. It was a fairly small room. But nobody talked to me except the guy sitting next to me who asked me to pass the salt. He introduced me to his wife, but I never heard his name. He never asked for mine. I have to tell you that when I left that place, I did send an email to them because I really do believe that when you complain without giving a meaningful opportunity for a correction of it, it's just whining. But I came into that place as a stranger, and I left that place as a stranger. Very different experience with another veterans group that I worked with later in the summer. In that place, they knew I was a visitor. They introduced me to every person as I walked in. Somebody walked with me to another place to show me where to go. They helped me find my place. Actually, I'm thinking about not paying my dues to the first one and joining the other. I don't know yet. I tell you of that as a reminder of what it means to welcome the other. Too often, though, we expect to be the one who's welcomed. Too often we see ourselves as the person sitting at the table. Too often we see ourselves as the one who wants to get something out of this encounter, rather than asking how we can make someone else's life better. Jesus is calling us to be the host. Jesus is inviting us to participate in the ministry of servanthood. Jesus is modeling what it means to put the needs of someone else before our own needs. And much like the disciples, we either don't understand or don't want to understand. We don't want to give up our position of importance. We don't want to stoop down and wash someone else's feet. We don't want to step aside to make room for the stranger. We don't want to be that person who comes to church early to set up snacks or be the one who stays late to clean up afterwards. There's a survey done some time ago, a poll taken of folks who give to their church regularly, and it showed that most people expect to get something in return. Some say they expect good sermons. Others expect high-quality youth programs. A few expected to serve, but no one mentioned suffering. Now, I haven't run a poll like that here, but my guess is that we're not much different. Jesus says he's going to die. And the disciples are worried about who is the most important. So Jesus picks up a little child and uses the child as an example. Now, I began to wonder about children in the Bible, and I could only think of 3 stories where children are involved. I mean, we have adults and we have babies. But there's a story of Abraham taking Isaac to sacrifice him. And there's the story of Samuel who hears the voice of God. And the story of Jesus in the temple, and they are amazed with his knowledge. I think the first one tells how that culture valued children, not much. And the other 2 are told with a sense of amazement that these children have something to offer. It's in that context that Jesus takes one of these unimportant children and uses the child as an example. He isn't telling us to become like the child, though. He's asking us to be like the one who welcomes the child. Our job is to serve the child. Our calling is to welcome the one who cannot repay us. Our task is to be the host for the other. Here's another picture. This one was on Facebook this week. I think it was clearly aimed at those who would rather stand at the borders of Europe and tell the refugees to go back home than to make room for them in their community. I guess it could be about the U.S.-Mexico border as well. I share it because I think it's a good image for the church in any place, in any community, including our own. It's a call to practice taranga, to invite the guest to share from our bowl, so that together we might experience the loving presence of God.